When George R.R. Martin began writing a book series called A Song of Ice and Fire nearly 20 years ago, he had no idea it would be adapted into one of the most popular TV series ever made. And when you read or watch this incredible content, all the battles, the characters, and the complex storylines, you can't help but wonder where he found his inspiration. Here we look at 5 Game of Thrones characters who may be loosely based around real-life historical figures, and although George R.R. Martin doesn't say much on the subject, and has never confirmed these fan-made links, it's not hard to find similarities between the two. As always, sit back and enjoy the video. King Joffrey and Edward of Lancaster. Joffrey Baratheon, Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, and eventually becoming king after Robert Baratheon's death, is the eldest child of Cersei Lannister, and believes his father is King Robert. Although it is known to us that his real father is his mother's twin brother, Jaime Lannister, as is the case with his other siblings. Joffrey is an incredibly cruel, arrogant, and vicious character who enjoys the torturing and killing of innocent animals and people, although is a coward when he is in any kind of real danger, and does well at avoiding this, mostly by his name and position. He either lies, flees, or orders people to sort things for him. And of course there's his mother behind the scenes, ensuring her son faces no harm or consequences.
Where is Joffrey?
On the battlements with Lord Tyrion.
Bring him back inside at once.
But, Your Grace.
What?
The King's presence is good for morale.
Bring him back to his chambers now.
Not here.
With the women and children, do you want him to be mocked as a coward for the rest of his life?
No, but
Now!
When Joffrey is eventually declared king, his behaviour only worsens and he becomes even more sadistic, all making him one of the most hated characters in the Game of Thrones series. In Season 4, his death was met mostly with jubilation, although despair from others at such the loss of an entertaining character. So could the almost psychotic Joffrey actually be based on a real-life ruler? Well, seemingly he is, and that person is Edward of Westminster, also known as Edward of Lancaster, and Edward, Prince of Wales, who was the only son of King Henry IV and Margaret of Anjou. He was conceived 8 years after his parents' marriage, during one of the king's periods of mental illness, and it was rumoured that King Henry was not his real father. Given the circumstances, people suspected Margaret of sleeping with one of her close friends in order to conceive, although this cannot be proved or disproved. But it does sound strikingly similar to the situation of Joffrey Baratheon's lineage, and how his mother Cersei would fool her husband King Robert in his drunken state, by finishing him off in other ways.
In the rare event that Rob believes us whores for long enough to stumble drunk into my bed, I finish him off in other ways. In the morning he doesn't remember.
You've always hated him.
It never crossed either king's mind that their heirs may not have been theirs, and it would seem neither did Joffrey or Edward question that their fathers may have been someone else. But why would they, as this would have made them illegitimate, causing a great scandal. After King Henry was captured in 1460, 7-year-old Edward fled with his mother to France, where it's said the very young prince developed an obsession with cutting off heads and making war. The ambassador of the Duchy of Milan once wrote to the court of France in 1467. This boy, though only 13 years of age, already talks of nothing but of cutting off heads or making wars, as if he had everything in his hands, or was the god of battle, or the peaceful occupant of that throne. It sounds familiar, although it said Edward at least didn't lack courage, whereas his counterpart Joffrey would only show authority when it came to punishing people, and not when it came to fighting in wars. In Game of Thrones, in an attempt to secure an alliance with the North, Joffrey is engaged to Sansa Stark, the eldest daughter of the traitor Eddard Stark, and sister of Robb Stark, who is leading a rebellion against him. After the deaths of both Eddard and Robb Stark, Joffrey's mother Cersei advises him to cast Sansa aside, as she is no longer a useful alliance, and he is swiftly engaged and married to Margaery Tyrell, who is widow of Renly Baratheon, Joffrey's uncle. Due to this, Margaery and her family were also considered as traitors, as they had supported Renly's claim to the throne, rather than Joffrey's. But House Baratheon, or rather House Lannister, agreed to this alliance as they needed troops, gold and wheat, all of which House Tyrell could supply. This all bears yet another likeliness to the historical basis Edward of Westminster, who after several years in exile, his mother agrees to an alliance with Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, an old enemy who had lately become disillusioned with the York King Edward IV and had switched to support the House of Lancaster. Prince Edward was also married to his youngest daughter Anne Neville in December 1470 to secure this alliance to proceed with a battle against Edward IV. His marriage to Anne was short, and some doubt it was ever consummated. We know Joffrey definitely didn't consummate his marriage, as he was murdered before he got the chance. Edward IV defeated and killed the Earl of Warwick at the Battle of Barnet, and Prince Edward bravely decided to lead his father-in-law's army to meet Edward IV in the Battle of Tewkesbury, but was defeated, and Edward was killed in 1471. There are conflicting reports of how Edward eventually met his death, with some believing he was captured and beheaded on a makeshift block, while others state he was cut down in the aftermath of the battle. However it happened, just like Joffrey, he was said to be very cruel at a young age, married to secure an alliance, and much like Joffrey, didn't see his 18th birthday. Theon Greyjoy and George Plantagenet. Theon Greyjoy, the last living son of Balon Greyjoy of the Iron Islands, has been a main character in Game of Thrones since Season 1. At 10 years old, he was sent to live with Eddard Stark and became his ward, after his father, Lord Balon Greyjoy, rebelled against King Robert. Later in the series, after the execution of Eddard Stark, and his son, Robb Stark, is named King in the North, Theon finally meets again with his father to discuss aiding Robb Stark in destroying his enemies. But when Balon Greyjoy refuses to support the Starks, Theon is torn between the two, and in what many interpreted to be an effort to please his father, Theon betrays his friend Robb Stark by invading the North and names himself the Prince of Winterfell. However, this is short-lived, and he is consequently betrayed by his own men and left to be tortured at the hands of Ramsay Snow, who torments, mutilates and starves Theon. With all that has happened to this character, it's hard to believe that he could possibly be inspired by a real person, but apparently so, and his real-life counterpart is George Plantagenet. Plantagenet was an English nobleman with the title of Duke of Clarence, born in 1449, and much like the life events of Theon Greyjoy, war separated George from his father, Richard of York, when he rebelled against Henry VI and lost the Battle of Wakefield in 1460, although at age 11, a year older than his counterpart Theon. In later years, George Plantagenet was also known for his arrogance and betrayal of his brother King Edward IV, similar to Theon's betrayal of Robb Stark, who although wasn't any relation, was considered a brother to him. Shortly after George's brother Edward became king in March 1461, George was appointed Lord Lieutenant of Ireland and came under the influence of Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, and the pair secretly supported an armed uprising in northern England, a resemblance to Theon's invasion of the north. The king, his brother, was captured, and Warwick attempted to govern the country in the king's name. However, this proved disastrous, and Warwick was forced to release the king in 1469. Remarkably, Edward did not seek revenge on his brother or Warwick. It wasn't until George betrayed the king again by launching another rebellion that the king finally took action against him, and in 1478, George was found guilty of plotting against the king and was locked up in the Tower of London before being executed. It's long been believed by historians that rather than being beheaded, George was drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine, and many are wondering if a similar fate is on the cards for Theon. He is from the Iron Islands after all, and sacrificial drowning is the traditional method of execution for the Iron Men. Daenerys Targaryen and Henry Tudor. Daenerys Targaryen is one of Game of Thrones' most popular characters. She is the daughter of the Mad King and his sister-wife queen, Rhaela, and is one of the last members of the Targaryen dynasty. Her father was killed by a member of his own Kingsguard, Sir Jaime Lannister, during Robert's rebellion before she was born, and her mother died shortly after giving birth. She was raised in exile with her brother Viserys, never staying long in one place, as it was suspected King Robert had sent an assassin after them to ensure no Targaryen heirs remain. Early in the series, she is married off to Khal Drogo of the Dothraki by her brother Viserys, in exchange for an army to aid him in invading Westeros and taking back the crown. Although, when Viserys assaults her and her unborn child with Khal Drogo, Drogo kills Viserys by pouring molten gold onto his head, leaving Daenerys as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. As the series progresses, her husband Khal Drogo dies, and Daenerys hatches 3 petrified dragon eggs, the only known dragons alive in the world, earning her the title Mother of Dragons. She then goes on to acquire a very large army and following, on a quest to take back what is rightfully hers, the Iron Throne. Her character is thought to have been inspired by the life of Henry Tudor VII. Henry was born in 1457 in Pembroke, Wales. His father Edmund too died before he was born, and his mother Margaret was just 13 when she gave birth to him. Margaret was also a descendant of Edward III, which presented Henry with a remote claim to the throne. But much like Daenerys, because Henry had a viable claim to the throne, he lived most of his life in exile across the English Channel, when the Yorkist Edward IV reclaimed the crown, who, much like Robert Baratheon, who would love to have had Daenerys killed to eliminate any rivals, Edward would have considered this for Henry had he not been out of the country, posing no real threat. However, when Edward died in 1483, his brother Richard claimed the throne over the king's 12-year-old son Edward V, making himself Richard III, also bearing a resemblance to another storyline in Game of Thrones surrounding King Robert's death and his brothers Stannis and Renly both claiming themselves as king over Robert's son. By this time, Henry Tudor was a leading Lancastrian and challenged his claim to the English crown. He promised his supporters that if he became king, he would marry Edward IV's daughter, Elizabeth of York, a move that would unite the warring houses of York and Lancaster, the opposing sides in the Wars of the Roses, bringing peace and unity. A move we know Daenerys plans when she takes back Westeros.
If I'm going to rule in Westeros, I'll need to make alliances. The best way to make alliances is with marriage.
In 1485, Henry fought the Battle of Bosworth, and Richard III was killed, leaving Henry to be crowned King Henry VII. Much like fans are hoping, Daenerys will defeat Cersei and be crowned queen in the next series. Henry went on to marry Elizabeth of York as promised, and united the Lancashires and the Yorks. He then accepted the Tudor Rose, which symbolised the start of the Tudor era, with both dynasties united. The final link to Daenerys is that Henry also flew a dragon as his banner.
Direwolves as direwolves. Although not exactly characters, direwolves are one of the coolest appearances in Game of Thrones, and somewhat resemble a modern-day wolf, although they are much larger. Described as being as large as a small horse and strong enough to rip a man's arm from its socket.
They were originally thought to be extinct in Westeros, and only found north of the Wall,
until Ned Stark found a deceased mother direwolf with her 6 orphaned pups south of the Wall. 1 pup was given to each of the Stark children, and the runt of the litter, an albino pup, to Jon Snow. As the storyline progresses, they become fierce protectors and companions to their owners, each sharing a unique bond and playing an important role in the overall story. Although much to fans' disappointment, only 2 out of the 6 remain at this point in the series. So although they are of course based on a wolf, was there ever a wolf species as large as a direwolf from Game of Thrones? There actually was, although not as large as the direwolves in the show. The real-life direwolf is an extinct North American prehistoric carnivore that lived 125,000 to 10,000 years ago, but was not named as a species until 1858, a few years after the first ever specimen was found. They were roughly the same size as a large modern-day grey wolf, weighing around 150 pounds, but their teeth were larger and they had a much greater bite force, the strongest of any known canine species. Their prey would have included bison, horses, camels, and giant ground sloths, and much like modern wolves, they would have hunted in packs. However, their short legs and heavier bodies meant they would have been much slower than the modern day wolf,
and it's thought they were much less intelligent, unlike the show's representation of the wolves. So perhaps the name and powerful bite force of these prehistoric carnivores was the only thing George R.R. Martin took for his inspiration. Nevertheless, an impressive amount of direwolf skulls have been excavated from the La Brea tar pits in Southern California, and nearly 400 of them are on display in the Page Museum. So Game of Thrones direwolves are somewhat a real thing, and you may one day be able to own one. The American Alsatian Breeders Association has been combining various dog breeds in an attempt to replicate the look of the prehistoric direwolf, and although they have not perfected the breed as of yet, a puppy can be bought for $4,000. Peter Baelish and Oliver Cromwell. Peter Baelish, or Littlefinger as he is commonly known, is initially considered powerless as he is from a very minor house, with no distinguished lineage, significant landholdings, or armies, and is a friendly, harmless character, or so it would seem. Really, he is an incredibly intelligent and ambitious man, and paired along with his cunning, manipulative, and deceitful nature, he's taken himself from low-born ward at Riverrun to ex-master of coin on the small council, Lord of Harrenhal, and Lord Protector of the Vale. On top of that, he is able to heavily influence the young Lord Robin Arryn, who is the new Lord Paramount of the Vale, and befriends Sansa Stark, gaining her loyalty and trust somewhat, as her name is valuable and she is his key to controlling the North. Not to mention, he also owns upscale brothels to both acquire intelligence on political rivals and acquire vast wealth. All in which he only achieves through lies, deception, marriage and murder, yet no one really suspects him. However, many characters have grown wise to his games and do not trust him, considering him to be a very dangerous man.
Only a fool would trust Littlefinger.
Littlefinger's life has been linked to a few different historical figures, although it's most likely thought to echo that of the legendary Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell was born in 1599, and similar to Littlefinger, was considered a member of the lesser gentry. His parents were Puritans, a Protestant sect that sought major reforms in the Church of England, and Cromwell was educated by a Puritan minister. After leaving Cambridge University, he married Elizabeth Bourchier and had 9 children. He was the most successful military and political leader of the Civil Wars, eventually becoming the first Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, including Wales at the time, Scotland and Ireland. In 1640, tensions began between Parliament and King Charles I over rising taxes, and Charles's proximity to Catholicism resulted in the outbreak of the English Civil War, in which Cromwell raised his own army, and after a number of victories over the king's forces, the king was eventually defeated by Cromwell's army. After the king's execution, Cromwell became the most dominant political figure in Britain. Following a series of brutal battles in Scotland and Ireland, in which thousands of innocent people were massacred, Cromwell forcibly dissolved the House of Commons, and in 1653 was named Lord Protector of the British Republican, and had the full power of a king, although he declined to actually take the crown on several occasions, something fans highly doubt would be the case if the crown was offered to Littlefinger. So the real likeliness between the two is their rise from nothing and a knack for strategically getting what they want, although in very different ways and very different reasons for doing so. Later in life, Cromwell became a bitter, possibly depressed man, and it's believed he died of natural causes in 1658. However, when the monarchy was reinstated in 1660, Cromwell's body was dug up from his grave, beheaded, and publicly hanged. Perhaps when the people of Westeros discover that Littlefinger was a driving force behind the state it is in now, he too will be publicly made an example of. So that's 5 Game of Thrones figures that it would seem have been based on real people and a prehistoric animal. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and we will be doing another video like this soon, but on events, battles, and other features in the show, where it would seem George used stages in medieval history as his inspiration. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.